Businesses should help their employees, treat them well, be fair, should take on the responsibility of making our neighborhoods better and our communities better, and should also keep our landscape clean and looking good. We take a lot of pride in that here in Kentucky.
Drilling into the most important part, which is happy employees. You don't have a business without happy employees that feel like they have a purpose behind what they do. And also part of being a happy employee is having your own needs taken care of.
55% of the people that work at FMS were referred there by other employees. That's a stat that we're very proud of, and we think that has a lot to do with our choice to solve problems through doing social good.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Middle Tech Podcast. You've got Evan Knowles. This episode, we sat down with Canopy Kentucky. So they are bringing B Corp certification as well as Canopy membership and certification to Kentucky that helps promote social enterprise. It helps promote social impact within for-profit businesses. This is Canopy's first time on our podcast. We've been speaking with them for a bit now, so it's about time we bring them on. They're doing great work here in the state, but also there's a larger network of individuals just like them across the country helping spread social impact and environmental focuses, DEI. There's a lot of, I think, terms being thrown around about what it means to be a responsible business and have stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder. It's a very hot topic, and we dove deep into that. We also dove into, we sat down with Scott Koloms, who is the founder of Canopy here in Kentucky, and connected his background growing facilities management services and how he's done that in a responsible manner and how that led into Canopy Kentucky. It's a really awesome story. Scott's a great storyteller. He really does a great job selling the mission and the impact that Canopy is having here in Kentucky. So really looking forward to you listening to this episode. Before we do, let's hear a word from our sponsors.
Before highlighting our sponsors, we'd just like to state that the views and content shared on this platform do not necessarily reflect those of our show sponsors. Middle Tech is presented by KY Innovation, the Kentucky Cabinet for Economic Development's Office of Entrepreneurship. KY Innovation exists to support and develop Kentucky's startup ecosystem, and we are proud to be supported by an organization whose mission aligns so closely with ours. If you're a founder building in Kentucky, you need to check out the resources that KY Innovation has to offer. You can find more information by clicking the link in our show notes or going to kyinnovation.com. Middle Tech is sponsored by Bolt Marketing. Take your website to the next level with a website that's built to work. At Bolt Marketing, they're revolutionizing websites for small businesses that are affordable, customizable, and hassle-free. Whether you have a construction company, a boutique clothing store, or you own a hot yoga studio, they have options for you. Click the link in our show notes to explore their marketing options that can transform your marketing and grow your business. And as a personal note, Bolt Marketing built our website, and they were awesome to work with throughout the entire process. We highly recommend working with. Middle Tech is also supported by Huntsicker, an impact venture studio based in Lexington, Kentucky. Huntsicker is creating companies out of the ordinary by founding and funding the next generation of purpose-driven startups. They partner with founders to create indispensable solutions to the world's most fundamental problems. On a quarterly basis, they host an invite-only intimate gathering called Fireside Convos, where attendees representing a wide network of stakeholders in the regional entrepreneurial ecosystem discuss timely topics, including the role of AI for startups out of Kentucky and the challenges of identifying and attracting talent. To be considered as a guest, visit huntsicker.co/fireside to apply. All right, welcome back to the Middle Tech Podcast. You've got Evan Knowles as the host today. Logan is out on this podcast, so I'm doing a solo hosting. I'm with Scott from Canopy. So Scott, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast this morning.
Great to be here, Evan. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're excited to talk about all the exciting things Canopy's up to. I've been aware of you all for, like I said, prior to jumping on the recording here, for a while. Got a lot of friends that talk highly of what you do. I'm connected with Ben. Ben got us this interview connected today, and looking forward to diving into the details and sharing Canopy with the community. So, we always like to start, obviously, with background, so the audience can come into the conversation and
dive deep and understand, the origins of where Canopy and yourself come from. Go into your own personal background though before we get to Canopy on, what were you doing prior to starting Canopy?
Running a janitorial service that at the time was based out of Shelbyville, Kentucky, called FMS. Prior to that, my background was in academia. I was working on a PhD up at Kent State University in essentially writing studies. And my dad had bought a business in Shelbyville, a little cleaning business, and passed away shortly after he bought it. And I took over the company in May of 2001. So really my journey over the last 23 years has been around taking that initial business model, which was, I think if I treat people well, this will work out somehow, and just becoming more sophisticated around that. So prior to the idea and conceptualization of Canopy, I was running this janitorial service that, probably at the time, that was moving along a trajectory towards social enterprise.
Yeah, we'll have to dive into what that means, the social enterprise, and how you view that. But it's had a lot of growth. Obviously, you have been running this business for 20 plus years. That's a huge accomplishment. Talk about the growth, because I think it's important, to understand the size of the business and just, where you guys stand as we get deeper into the conversation, because I'm sure there's a lot of stories to take away from it on your journey, and others might resonate with it. So talk about kind of where that business is today.
Yeah. So when I took over for Dad, we had about 30 employees. The statistics, the stats that I cite, about 30 employees, 850,000 in long-term debt, was doing about 600, 700 in revenue and losing, 70 grand, 80 grand a year. He was using credit cards for operating capital. So, the running joke is always, I'm happy that I was studying writing and didn't know what I was walking into. It was definitely a difficult scenario. And over the course of the last 3 years, we've grown to about 25 million in revenue, around 600 employees. We've paid off all that debt. And, we have a presence, at about a 200-mile radius, with the exception of north, around Louisville. So we have a branch in Lexington. We have a branch in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and one in Shelbyville still.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, no, when I was doing research part of the podcast, I noticed you guys had, from you telling me it was a family-owned small business in Shelbyville and has grown to that. I figured there was a story there of growth, and thanks for sharing. And what point in the business did you start to have really a lean towards what you mentioned earlier, social enterprise? When did that come into the picture, and also loop that into Canopy coming into the picture?
Yeah, so it was probably about 8 or 9 years into the picture. We had grown, to 200 plus employees, and we had our first leadership retreat where we went out to General Butler State Park, which is out 71. And really the purpose of that weekend getaway with, I think there was about 15 of us, leaders in the organization, 15, 20 of us, was to ask, how did we go from those 30 employees to that 200 plus? And I didn't know it at the time, but we were arriving at a core value, because the resounding answer that we all came up with was that we care about the people we work with. So, that was, open enough to include customers, all the stakeholders, in addition to fellow employees, but people in the community. But we really landed on just a lot of stories of how we've had each other's backs, how we helped each other out, how we got to know each other, how we believed in the company because of the relationships we had with our customers and with each other. And that became the core value. And from that, we began to ask ourselves questions like, well, if that is what's allowed us to achieve success, how do we ensure that that continues in the future? How do we build that into our company in ways that make it to where it won't go away as we get bigger, as we succeed, and fully wide-eyed and aware that that concept can get lost as an organization gets larger. So again, in that moment, in an intuitive way, we were thinking about, okay, well, how do you sustain culture? We were asking questions about how do you really bake values into policy, procedure, operations, things like that. We weren't necessarily using those words, but those were the questions we were asking ourselves.
Yeah. Talk about what you learned about exactly that, incorporating that culture and creating a system around it for sustainability. Now you're several years after that event, many years after that event, it sounds like. And I would assume, given the growth, you guys are doing a good job of that. So, coming out of that, what are some things you put in place to make sure that that is sustainable?
Yeah. So, one thing to recognize is that it's certainly a path. There's no finish line in that effort. There's a lot of bumping about that goes on, trying different things and missing the mark sometimes, and, stepping backwards, reflecting. Actually, reflecting isn't necessarily stepping backwards, but taking a breath and reflecting and looking at what's going on and juking and jiving based on what's working and what's not working. That's a continuous dynamic process, a reflective practice. So, there were a lot of great stories and lessons and missteps along the way and successes. But, the idea being, how do we build what we call this sort of culture around we care about each other into the experience of an FMS employee from the moment they're hired to the moment should they depart. And some of the early initiatives that we adopted were sort of in the more traditional lens, what people have a tendency to go to. So, how do we reward our employees? How do we make them feel good? So coming up with, regular annual events, appreciation events, what began as, what's really interesting, it's fun to think of the trajectory. And again, this is just one small example, is, way back then when we were headquartered in Shelbyville, we would have our annual FMS sort of picnic, and literally it was in the driveway and garage of one of our key employees' house, Kathy Russell, who was with the company when Dad bought it. She's amazing. She's still with us today. And her husband, JR, was, a little bit of a musician, a little bit of a kind of a ham sort of guy, loved to set up the karaoke, and we would just set up karaoke, everybody brings some potluck food, and, we just have a great celebration. And of course, recently that's turned into what kind of looks like a Catholic church picnic. We got bouncies, we've got games, we got 500 people showing up, family, kids everywhere, and prizes and dances, and, and it's really quite the event. But, that started back at Kathy's place in a garage. So just those sorts of things. The cooler programs were things, and I guess the more sophisticated story is around really diving into the idea of, how do we landed on the idea that we want to take care of people. We want to do good in the world. We believe that we should have a positive influence on people. We should make lives better in our communities and for our people. And we wanted to move beyond maybe some of the traditional ways of thinking about that, which would be, charitable giving. Let's write a check to some organizations that matter. Maybe we can encourage people to volunteer in certain spaces, or we'll gather up and, do a cleanup for the city or something like that. These are great things that are necessary. But we also were conceptualizing a different way of approaching it. And for me, that was, what if you could focus your good and utilize it to solve a problem in your business. And, that's a simple concept, but not a lot of businesses are thinking that way. And I think that that's one of the key steps towards social enterprise, is to where the good that you're doing helps your business succeed in very measurable and tangible ways. And the further that good gets embedded within your organization, the more you're moving along this trajectory towards social enterprise. And so I like to think of it as, maybe on one side of the spectrum, you have an organization to where, they're good in the way they want to take care of people in the community. It exists maybe in a separate department or even in a foundation, that it's sort of a different piece of the company. Whereas if you go to the other side of that spectrum, you have an organization to where if you were to remove that direct measurable social good, the entity would collapse. That it's such a fundamental part. And really, we've just moved along that trajectory. We aren't a full-blown social enterprise by any means, but we do have programming that is designed to help solve problems, and at the same time are very much helping people live better lives. So,
yeah, no, I love it. And the first time I really became aware of all of the stakeholder capitalism and social enterprise and some of those initiatives was actually, I'm in the software space, obviously, and Mark Benioff of Salesforce has, really built a lot of this into their culture and the way they treat their employees, but also, they give a certain percentage of their revenue and profits towards, like you said, foundations and ways to give back to the community, to the environmental causes. And, it's definitely a quickly growing topic within the business world. I think, stakeholder capitalism is something that, the younger generation is really receiving well. So where does Canopy and the B Corp movement, fall into this? And how did you get involved with that? Because when I looked at, Canopy, when I first became aware of it, I was really kind of impressed by how they're starting to scale a network and, a movement. I said movement earlier. I think it really is starting to look like that. So talk about how that helps scale, some of the principles you talk about employing in your own business across the world. And when did you start getting involved in that?
Yeah, sure. So as we got better at this concept of caring about the people we work with, we decided to go. I think we took 8 to 10 of our leaders up to a conference up in Cleveland, Ohio, at Case Western, called Flourish and Prosper. And really the theme of that conference was around the idea of businesses being the driver for positive social change. And it was there that I met one of the founders of B Lab. And B Lab is a nonprofit that administers the B Corp certification process. And after a conversation with him around the work that we were doing, he encouraged me to take a look at the B Corp certification process, which I did in that moment. And, it's a 200 plus inquiry point process. And I looked at that and I, thought to myself, oh, wow, this is a roadmap really essentially to what I want to do. There were considerations in there that I hadn't thought of, even thought to look at within my organization. Things like really digging into your vendors and your relationship with your vendors, looking at who you're purchasing from. In my work, at that point in my career, it hadn't occurred to me really to dive into that too much. And that's just one example. So at that point, I said, all right, let's do this. Let's make this happen. So we came back and took that challenge on, and it was a challenge. We brought in a consultant and met every Tuesday for about a year, and worked through that and turned in our 300-page plus response and became the second B Corp in the state of Kentucky and still the only janitorial service in the world to achieve B Corp certification. And because of that, Evan, I attracted the interest of State Representative Jerry Miller, who was working with Bryce Butler and a number of other people to try to get the public benefit corporation legislation passed in the state of Kentucky, and it had been shut down a couple times. And Representative Miller saw FMS as the ideal sort of representative company of a public benefit corporation. And so we got to know each other, and I helped him lobby across the state and meet people. And that really was the genesis of Canopy, because through that experience, I came to see how many businesses, good-hearted business leaders there were across the state, and how many businesses were operating in that sort of intuitive space that I, described as us being really prior to becoming a B Corp and really digging into this stuff. And I thought, man, what an interesting concept to try to harness those businesses together to maybe tackle some tough problems, but also from an economic development standpoint, to maybe make Kentucky known for this sort of business. So that was sort of the aha moment. Couple that with the fact that I did a little research, and I was like, man, there's only 2 B Corps in Kentucky, and the South is very underrepresented, and still is, in terms of B Corp. And a lot of that has to do with the language. A lot of it has to do with sort of the inevitable, well, I shouldn't say inevitable, we try to avoid it, but the sometimes political nature of the work that we do. Canopy is very careful to stay away from all of that. However, B Corp isn't, and you can decide on your own whether you think that's right or wrong, but that simply is, and that doesn't resonate in certain communities in the South. You can't lead with certain concepts and ideas and expect to gain any traction. So really, Canopy was somewhat of an answer to that, and we wanted to create something that kind of had open doors to a certain extent, kind of took you where you are, but held on to some core values around the idea that, look, businesses should help their employees, treat them well, be fair, should take on the responsibility of making our neighborhoods better and our communities better, and should also keep our landscape clean and looking good. We take a lot of pride in that here in Kentucky, and we should all take responsibility for that. So, that language is obviously well thought out. We try to avoid certain triggering words for people, but at the end of it, most people agree with that. Let's keep our house clean. Let's take care of people. Let's take care of neighborhoods, and that's the way to do business. So that's really how Canopy, the concept, came about. And from there, it was just a matter of creating an organization to try to harness the energy of these good-hearted companies.
Yeah, love that. And you mentioned, there's criteria, and for the B Corp, we want to focus on Canopy here, but for the B Corp certification, you mentioned bringing in, a consultant and having, a journey and a roadmap there. How do you think about that with Canopy? What does it look like to be a Canopy certified company and be part of that network? How does one do that?
Yeah. So first of all, you can go visit our website, www.canopyky.org, and become a member is the first step. Join the initiative overall. You're required to be a member to become Canopy certified. And really, that's just a commitment that you believe in the movement, you believe in the general concepts of what we're discussing here, and you want to be part of this network of businesses that are thinking this way. And it's a really strong network of businesses, Evan. I think we're up to 51 members now, and it's different than maybe your typical business organization in that they're usually founded, they exist based on maybe an industry, a shared industry, or a shared geography. This is an organization that's very much based around shared values, shared around, concepts of the way we should do business. So it's different. And we've observed that the relationships have a tendency to be tighter, and which translates into more synergies and more opportunities for benefits for our members. So first you become a member, and then should you decide you want to take that next step to become Canopy certified, it's free with your membership fee, and it's an online platform. And the way it works is you go through your first year a series of fundamentals, just basic principles that are broken up into 4 key areas. That's looking at your leadership, that's looking at your culture, that's looking at your governance, and that's looking at your external impact. And you go through some minimum requirements and you become Canopy certified. Then you move into what we call the continuous improvement phase. And that's where it's sort of a choose your own adventure, where we have 100 plus inquiry points that challenge you to just get better at taking care of people, communities, neighborhoods, and our landscape. Yeah,
love that. Yeah, definitely encourage checking out the website, at least just to learn. I first learned about it from Ben and actually Land Betterment. I went to a little get together with Land Betterment group, and Ben was there. And definitely encourage, diving in deeper beyond just this podcast and seeing if you're interested in becoming a member. For those that, are a member and, follow this movement and, B Corps in general, but let's keep it to Canopy. How do you all think about the relationship between, social impact within a business and the criteria and kind of the program that you guys put together and profit? So how do you speak to maybe an entrepreneur or a leader within a business and say, what's the relationship between, social impact and what, our beliefs are, but also your need to run, a sustainable, profitable business? Because I would imagine, part of the political part that you mentioned earlier is kind of like the, deeply rooted in, capitalism. And I'm sure that, there's movements that you guys maybe at some point have gotten looped into, like ESG and others, that, many people in circles look at and say, well, that's not prioritizing profits, and we live in a capitalistic society. So how do you speak to this dynamic of social impact and its relationship to profits? I think that's a really interesting conversation that, is oftentimes the root behind a lot of the political kind of strife between, I think what's going on in the economy and benefit towards both the environment, but also people and social causes. So how do you talk about that relationship?
Well, I start by saying and there's so many examples out there, that's another false opposition that we like to put out there, because that's the way we like to talk about the world these days. It seems like you're either this or you're that, and a lot of we have to have that simple headline. We have to have that sound bite that says you're either in this bucket or you're in this bucket, which of course anybody that lives in the real world knows is completely ridiculous. We know this rationally, yet we fall into this trap when it comes to so many things. So first thing I would say is that's a false opposition, that either you're going to do good for the world or you're going to maximize profit and make a lot of money. I think that that's ridiculous, and there's countless examples of how that can be done. But, one way I talk about it is, thinking about how to solve a business problem by doing good. So, and I think the easiest way to describe that is an example. So in my for-profit business, we're a janitorial service. Our biggest issue, as you can imagine, is employee retention and turnover, right? So we are dealing with an industry that has 200+% average turnover. So our goal is to try to minimize that. That's how we beat the competition 9 out of 10 times. So the idea being, all right, well, if that's the case, how do we get folks to stay around? So our process was, first we decided here's what they'll love. Let's do it. We realized, let's take a couple steps back. Let's ask them what they'd like, and then we'll go from there. We found out that, perhaps not surprisingly, what our employees are looking for is more security around their own personal health and more security around their financial health. So what we did is we came up with a social mission that's to provide our employees with access and opportunity and help the communities where they live thrive with a focus on physical and financial health for our employees. So what we did at that point is we decided to start creating programming or partner with nonprofits that already had programming to do this and offer them to our employees. Those have now become what I call non-traditional benefits, these programs that we offer to our employees. But an example would be Working Your Way Home is a program where we partnered with a number of different community organizations, including lending institutions, residential home expertise organizations, and created a process to guide our employees and help them financially to home ownership. And to date, we have now, I think, helped 13 or 14 employees get home ownership for the first time. And then we took that concept and applied it to another flagship program called Working Your Way to Wheels, to where we identified an employment barrier for a lot of our folks is transportation. And I think we're now up to 21 vehicles purchased for our folks that needed a vehicle. And those sort of programs are highly successful. And as you can imagine, the people that participate in them have a fraction of the turnover rate of other people in our organization, and our organization in general has a fraction of the turnover rate compared to the industry. And that's the sort of thing I'm talking about when I say that at the end of it, this is good business. It is allowing me to offer better services, more consistent services to my customers, which allows me to have the extremely high retention rate of cleaning customers as compared to the industry average too. So that's one piece that, that I think that with some clever thinking, with some, you can figure out a way to solve a problem and do this. And then there's perhaps the less measurable benefits you get. People tell the stories. In the surveys, they talk about how proud they are to work for a company that does these sorts of things for their employees. 55% of the people that work at FMS were referred there by other employees. That's a stat that we're very proud of. And we think that has a lot to do with our choice to solve problems through doing social good.
Yeah, no, that is amazing. I love that, and you're so right. And I think it's just very unfortunate the times we live in, how polarized things are. I love how you led with that. Like there's no black and white world here. It's no one right answer and a wrong answer. It's a very complex ecosystem. And you're right. I think you are drilling into the most important part, which is happy employees. You don't have a business without happy employees that feel like they have a purpose behind what they do. And also part of being a happy employee is having your own needs taken care of. And how do you do that? Well, it sounds like you're helping them with transportation and shelter, but also building equity. A lot of important things. And the way I like to think about it, one of the ways is, it's like I mentioned, it's a complex ecosystem. If you take and do a comparison with your own health, like it's not like an athlete is either a bad athlete or a good athlete, and it's just that simple of I can immediately be a good athlete. No, well, there's a complex system that led up to being a great athlete and a really, let's say, an Olympian. It takes both the physical health, it takes the emotional health, and oftentimes the best athletes and the people that have themselves together the best have some kind of spiritual component. And you can translate that to a business. You have to have social good. You have to take care of your employees. There's all these things that lead to an elite business, just like there's all these things that lead to an elite athlete. And to tell a business that you either have to fall into this camp or that camp is wrong. And I think that you're right. I think it's just the times we live in that there's polarization. And I think the more that you dig into these things, just like you gave in a deep dive there into your own business, you realize there's so much more of a complex web of decisions that go into building a healthy business. And there's a path that leads to that. And it sounds like Canopy and the B Corp movement is really what that is trying to create that path, right? Yeah, I love that. And give an idea to the audience of, when is it appropriate for a business to jump on that path? You mentioned that, it was about correct me if I'm wrong, about 8 years into FMS and what you all are doing, because there's stages of a business, right? So how do you think about the stage of a business that, they should be thinking about this? Is it right when they start? Is it, once they reach a certain level of sustainability and they really want to start to instill values in their business, they're out of survival mode and now they've got some profits and, it's a sustainable business. So let's also figure out how to be more sustainable for our community. Give an idea of when you think it's appropriate to start to join the Canopy membership and network of B Corps.
I don't think that there's any inappropriate time. I would say that FMS is a conversion company, meaning that we weren't really thinking of it this way, at least intentionally. My dad, wasn't. So we began to understand the concepts, the more concrete concepts through the B Corp process, but then really diving in on our own, doing some research and coming to understand better. And yeah, I will say what's kind of fun about this space is that it's really new. I assume, like hundreds of years ago, there weren't well-developed textbooks around accounting principles or, management principles, things like that. We're in that space where those textbooks are being written about this sort of thing and articles are being written. You can do some simple research and see just the number of articles that have been written recently, and I say recently, let's call it the last 10 years, about these concepts, whether, it's triple bottom line, mission-driven businesses, all the different words that we can use to describe at its essence, this idea of a stakeholder economy, inclusive economy, that sort of a thing, is just blowing up. And, 10 years from now, we're going to look back and it's going to be a little bit more solidified. So it's a fascinating time, for sure, to be sort of bumping around in this. I like it. And there's a lot of mistakes to be made. And yeah, I'm enjoying what I'm doing. And I will say that I like to add that in there, that it's fulfilling, for me. I am competitive. Don't get me wrong. I do like to win. I like to have better ideas. I like to enact those ideas, and I do derive pleasure from taking something from concept to successful execution. It's a very satisfying process for me, and I also know that my legacy for my children is will not be in a profit and loss statement.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a very impactful statement there. I love that. And, back to just like the athlete analogy I made earlier and kind of comparing it to the complex web, if you're only focused on shareholders and profits, you're going to burn out. Something's going to break. Just like if you're an athlete and you only focus on gaining muscle or only focus on your time to run the 100-yard dash, you're going to fall apart in other parts of your life and you're not going to be able to be an athlete because you're only focused on that thing. And with stakeholder capitalism, you're able to leave a heavier legacy that's more wide-reaching than just profits. And, I think that is something to think about. And that statement right there, ultimately, I think is part of what gives us purpose as humans, is what is my legacy going to be when I'm no longer here?
Right.
And I think that is a great way to loop, the background of Canopy we've given and your own personal story. And I love that. Thanks for putting a pin there and with an impactful statement. We'll use that as a good soundbite there. But I guess just to kind of look forward and project where this goes in Kentucky, where do you hope to see it in the next 5 years, and how do you project that growth, and how do you get there?
Well, I hope it continues to grow at the rate it's growing. We just launched our membership model, about 3.5-4 months ago, and we're already up to 51 members. Canopy certified. I think we're up to 38 Canopy certified companies, which, is amazing. And we represent about $1 billion in revenue across the state, which is wonderful. I hope our network continues to expand, and I think it will. We're going to target new markets over the next year. We're really going to dive into Bowling Green, We're going to dive into Lexington a little bit more, and Danville. And those are intentional spaces because we have board members in those areas. And I also think that what's exciting and is going to keep us relevant is the innovative programming that we continue to offer. And a great example of that, and this is more, you can look at our programming or the work we do kind of falls into two spheres that overlap. One is traditional business services. I wouldn't call them traditional, but business services and products, and that would be sort of the certification, the educational workshops. Those are the sort of things we're doing for our members to gain benefit, networking events, facilitating B2B relationships. These are the sort of things that you would expect to see in a business organization. Now, the other side of it is, and you alluded to this early on when you were talking, is the movement making component of our work. And that is really trying to create a different way of thinking about business. And so a lot of our effort and innovation lies there. And to give you an example of what I mean, we just locked in a 3-year partnership with Junior Achievement to where with their, for 5th graders, their BizTown concept, to where they create don't know if you're familiar with it, but at its essence, it's a mini town where students in 5th grade show up at this site, and they take on roles within businesses, within politics, and they operate together, and they go around and sort of have tasks they do and engage with one another to learn how a city runs, how businesses run, how politics run, by engaging with one another in this sort of make-believe city. In BizTown, for the next 3 years at this point, Canopy will be one of the buildings, one of the organizations, and business leaders in BizTown will decide what good they want to do for their community. And they'll check off a box and say, well, we want to help feed people. We want to help find homes for the homeless. We want to make sure that the air we breathe is clean. We want to help keep our neighborhoods, trash out of our neighborhoods, and help with recycling. So they'll choose some of these things. But the lesson early on that we're really trying to get to is that a business should include these sort of components beyond just the core product or service and beyond just making that money. And we're excited to have the opportunity to expose, 12 to 15,000 kids in 5th grade to this concept that early in their educational trajectory. So, that's exciting work that really truly can change thinking and the way things happen as we move forward. So hope to continue to expand that sort of work and how we do that in the community.
Yeah, that's special. And it's generational, right? These are principles that, change over periods of time, long periods of time. So if you can get involved that early and start to change minds that early, and that's great.